Alrighty, folks, looks like we are live. I'm George, one of the founders of Solo Suit. Happy to be with you all today. We're going to be talking about bankruptcy. We have Karra with us here today. We're glad to have you here. Could you go ahead and tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Karra Kingston, and I am a bankruptcy lawyer. I also do consumer protection, FDCPA, and FCRA, but I help consumers who are in debt every single day. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right, folks. So we're going to go over some of the basics on responding to a debt lawsuit. We reserve most of the time here for any questions that you have. So if you have a question, just go ahead and put that into the chat. We will be trying to get to that by the end of the webinar. We end about half past the hour. This is a fine time just to give a slight, little disclaimer. This isn't legal advice. We aren't your law firm or your lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. Karra is a licensed attorney. She isn't your attorney. So we're providing legal advice. We're just doing a webinar here. And with that, let's go ahead and get into things. All right. So we're talking about tips on filing for bankruptcy. All right, Karra, is it possible to file bankruptcy without an attorney?
Yes, it's always possible to file for bankruptcy without an attorney. I don't recommend it, but you can file for bankruptcy without an attorney. The reason I don't recommend it is because a lot of times consumers don't know about what exemptions to use. Exemptions allow you to keep certain property when you file for bankruptcy. There are every state has different exemptions that you're allowed to use, federal or state exemptions, and that is very confusing for a consumer, typically who has never gone through this before, a debtor who's never gone through this before. So I typically advise to hold off on doing that. Also, a lot of the attorneys are doing this every single day. They have relationships with the trustees, so I recommend always having a lawyer.
Okay. Fantastic. All right, folks, and if there's any problem with the audio or the visual, let us know. There was a echo for a minute. I think we got that resolved. All right, let's jump into the next question here. What happens when you declare bankruptcy?
So there are 3 different chapters of bankruptcy: Chapter 7, Chapter 13, Chapter 11. I'll talk about the personal bankruptcy. So what happens is that when you do a Chapter 7, your assets become part of a property of the estate. That means the bankruptcy court basically oversees all of your assets. If you do a Chapter 7, your debts get erased and you no longer have to pay anyone back. If you do a Chapter 13, that means that you are paying something back to your creditors over a 3 to 5 year repayment plan. Chapter 11 is typically for businesses, but I'm not sure what else you want me to tell you.
That sounds good for the basic rundown. What else could we talk about here on the bankruptcy? I suppose people oftentimes have questions around the credit score, like what happens to their credit score after they file for bankruptcy. Will they ever be able to get a credit card again?
Yeah. So I think there's a really big misconception about filing for bankruptcy and how it impacts credit scores. And a lot of people think that they'll never get credit again if they file for bankruptcy. That's not true. And a lot of times, sometimes people's credit scores increase. That's because of debt to income ratio. So a lot of times if you file for Chapter 7 and you have a really low credit score because your debt is so high, it will get wiped out. And in some cases, people's credit scores actually increase, which is surprising for most people, but I do get clients who are very surprised by that all the time. Nobody can guarantee that to you. Typically what happens to a credit score is that the accounts will be marked as closed and bankruptcy. You can start having really good credit within 2 years. You'll probably start with a secured credit card, which they'll lend you right after your discharge, honestly. Most of them will start lending you then. If you're looking for a house, it's 2 years from a Chapter 7 and for an FHA loan, and it's 4 years for a conventional loan. But bankruptcy is there to help consumers start over, and I think that that's a really big misconception, that everyone thinks this is the end of the world, but it's really there to give you a fresh start and start over. And if the bankruptcy court didn't allow this, then you would keep walking around with debt and not being able to get things. It would defeat the whole purpose of why bankruptcy laws are enacted.
Right. Okay. And folks, if you are on here because you need to respond to a debt lawsuit, you can just go ahead and use this link here to respond to the debt lawsuit. That link will support Karra as well. So if you're using Solo Suit, just make sure you click onto that link, and then you can use this to create an answer document, respond to a debt lawsuit. Great. How does the bankruptcy impact the debt lawsuit? So let's say somebody's being sued right now. If they file bankruptcy, how does that impact the lawsuit?
Yeah, so if you are being sued, or if you even entered into some type of settlement with a debt collector or a law firm, you can file for bankruptcy at any point in time. So if you file for Chapter 7, an automatic stay goes into place. This means that creditors or debt collectors cannot go after you anymore. The lawsuit will stop as soon as you file. And if you entered into an agreement with a debt collection law firm or a debt collector, that also can be included in a bankruptcy in Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 as well. But there is this automatic stay. That means that any lawsuits pending against you have to cease immediately. And if they don't, then there's a violation that they can be liable for damages.
Right. Okay, so there's a stay once they file for a lawsuit, or once they file for bankruptcy. There's a stay on their lawsuit. Great. What debts can or cannot be discharged through bankruptcy?
So debts that typically can't be are child support, fines, parking tickets, criminal fines cannot be. Divorce attorneys, legal fees, if it's for child custody and things like that, typically can't be, and some tax debt. So for tax debt, it has to be 3 years or older, and you have to have filed on time, and it has to be income tax debt. Other debts that can be discharged are obviously credit cards, medical bills, any unsecured loans. Secured loans can be discharged also, but if, for example, if you want to give up your vehicle in a bankruptcy, it's not like you can just keep your vehicle and not pay it. Otherwise, you have to give it up. So really important. You can't just say, I'm going to file for bankruptcy, get that loan discharged, and keep your car. That's not going to happen. But they can be included if you want to do a voluntary repossession. That can be included as well, and medical bills.
Right. Okay. Great. We'll jump into the questions from the audience here. Folks, there's a lot of you guys on the call, on the show tonight, so if you have a question, just go ahead and stick that into the chat. We'll try our best to get to it. What if I own, this is a question from Pat, what if I own an LLC with no assets, generating only approximately $500 a month in income?
So I can't really go into your specifics. I don't know what state you're in or what the median income is in your state. What I can say is that if it's a small business, it depends. If there's no assets and it's personal debt, then you may be able to do a Chapter 7, and the trustee won't go after your business because there's no assets to go after. But I don't know what kind of business it's set up as, and is your debt personal or business debt? So that would be determinative of what chapter you should file.
Okay, great. So in this case, what are the questions that you need answers to determine things a little bit more, like what state he's in? Is the debt a personal debt or a business debt?
Yeah. Is it personal? Is it business? What state? I mean, he already said that there's no assets. Does he have personal assets aside from this? And what are they? Because the trustee can go after them possibly if there's no exemption.
Okay, great. And if it is, let's say it's a personal debt.
So if it's a personal debt, if there's no assets and it's a small business, you could probably do a Chapter 7, assuming that you don't have high income. You may be able to do a Chapter 7. The trustee typically looks for assets. So if there's no assets in the business and your company is not worth anything, then you may be able to do a personal bankruptcy.
Okay. Great. Dixie said, "You guys are my heroes." So that's great. John, can I file bankruptcy in forma pauperis when I have no assets or money?
I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
Yeah, this is from John. He said, "Can I file bankruptcy in forma pauperis when I have no assets or money?"
Yes, you can file for bankruptcy if you have no assets or money. That's what bankruptcy is there for.
And forma pauperis, I believe, is saying like without paying a fee to file.
Yeah. So again, that's every court has their own minimum income that allows them to decide if you're below that poverty line, then you may be able to apply for an exemption. So you'd have to speak to your court clerk about if you're below that poverty line and if you can get that waived.
What is waived exactly? Is the filing fee for bankruptcy?
It's the filing fee, yeah.
So there's usually a filing fee in addition to attorney's costs for bankruptcy?
Yes. So that fee is $338 for a Chapter 7. So you'd have to file some type of paperwork proving your income and showing the court to ask them if you can get that waived.
Is that across the country? That's like the fee anywhere in the U.S.?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the fee. $338 is the federal fee.
Interesting. All right. Parwez, why does a Chapter 7 get dismissed sometimes and force you to go to Chapter 13?
So Chapter 7s can be dismissed for many reasons. Most of the time it's likely because the debtor has an asset and they want to keep the asset. So instead of having the trustee sell the asset, you may be able to convert into a Chapter 13 so that you can keep the asset and keep paying the equity in that asset rather than having the trustee sell it. That's one of the reasons. I would say if the debtor somehow is making too much and they didn't qualify for a 7, it may be converted to a 13.
Great. Question from Josh. If I file and technically I'm still married, but currently separated, can the trustee go after any assets of my wife, like her office condo owned by her only, or timeshare that we share but no equity?
So this would depend on what state you're in, if you're in a community property state or equitable distribution state, and how the property was accumulated between you guys. Because, for example, where I am, it is an equitable distribution state, but they will consider what property was acquired during your marriage and determine if you have an interest in that property. In a community property state, you guys both legally own it half and half, from what I'm aware of. So I assume that the trustee can consider that as yours. So you have to really look at your property laws.
Okay, so this really depends on if the state is a common property or a equitable distribution state.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great. Question from Marie. I am in New Jersey. There you go, fellow New Jersey.
Thank you. So am I.
Yep, that's great. I co-signed a house for my son in Florida. I'm not working now. Is it a good idea for me to file Chapter 7? Sounds like, presumably she's being hounded for some debts as well.
Yeah, so that would technically depend on whether your name was on that property too, because if there's equity in that property in New Jersey and you don't live in it, you don't have an exemption. If you just co-signed a loan, then you're technically not an owner of that and you may still qualify for bankruptcy. But if you do own that property, then you may not qualify for Chapter 7, possibly a 13, if your name is on that property.
Right. So her name's on the loan, but the question is her name on the deed for the property?
Correct.
If it is not on the deed, she might qualify for Chapter 7. If it is on the deed, she might need to do Chapter 13 because of the equity in the house.
Correct. I mean, unless there's no equity in the house, which is not likely these days, but you never know.
Right. Right. Okay. That is helpful. I suppose she's also maybe wondering if she'll lose the house for her son if she files for bankruptcy.
So That would depend on which chapter you qualify for. So I think you do need to speak with somebody, an attorney. You can reach out to me, but it really depends on the equity in the home and what you qualify for. If you do a Chapter 7 and you're not on the home, and then it's not going to make a difference. If you do a Chapter 7 and your name is on the title to the home, then yes, you can lose it. So you may need to do a Chapter 13 to help you get rid of those debts.
Right. Okay, and here is the website for Karra. You can go and check that out if you're interested in talking with her further. Also, while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and add in the YouTube channel for Karra also. So, there you go. That's more videos you can check out there. Great. Looking at the next question, we got one from Julian. Any info on old student debt loans and bankruptcy Chapter 7?
Yeah, so it's been difficult to get them discharged. There's new laws that are coming out to try to say that, you know, you can get student loans discharged. I don't do it. A lot of us don't do it. And the reason is that it is hard. You have to show an undue hardship. Most of our clients who are debtors, don't have the money to pay to try to litigate it where nothing may come out of it. And that's, I think, the biggest hurdle right now, because it doesn't guarantee and you have to litigate it and you may end up wasting money in fees and not get anything out of it.
Okay. Another question from Josh. I'm in California and filing separately. Is there any worry of trustee going after any assets of my wife when I filed separately?
So I don't know what California's marital laws are. I don't know if I think it's community, but I'm not sure. But it depends, again, if you're in a community property state or an equitable distribution state, because that will determine if they'll go after your wife's assets as well, and when you accumulated those assets, and if those assets have increased in any equity during the time of your marriage.
Who is the trustee? The trustee is the state appointed person, lawyer on the bankruptcy case. Is that right?
Yes. So the trustee is an attorney, and he oversees your case and handles it to make sure that you haven't committed any type of fraud, to make sure that you do qualify for bankruptcy. And he basically is appointed by the court to oversee your case. He represents your creditors, essentially.
Right. Okay. Question from John. I know that's a little complicated, but thank you. Oh, I guess that's more of a comment from John.
You're welcome.
I don't know if John asked a question. John, if you had a question, go ahead and stick that into the chat. All right. Let's see. All right, folks. We have some more folks that have joined on to the show. If you have a question and you want us to answer it, just go ahead and stick it into the chat. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and stick that in there. Great. Karra, maybe you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your background. How did you get into the space? How did you get into bankruptcy? How did you get into being a lawyer? Maybe you could give us a little insight on your background.
Sure. So bankruptcy is a very small niche. You'd be surprised that not many attorneys do bankruptcy. But my dad was a bankruptcy lawyer, so that's basically how I started. I was doing, first before law school, I would copy papers and work in his office doing things like that. Then once I got into law school, I was his paralegal and I started to do all of that stuff. And then I started to open up my own practice. So, I really deal with everyone who's in debt. And we also started to do these FDCPA and FCRA claims for people who have inaccuracies on their credit report as well, and debt collectors who are harassing consumers, and bankruptcy as well. And we also answer lawsuits. Well, you guys do too, but yeah.
Right. Great. All right, we got a couple more questions here that came in. John, maybe you could just post your question again. You're saying I missed it. I don't see it in the chat. Maybe just rewrite your question as a new comment. All right, Maria, I live in South Carolina. How do I start the process of filing for bankruptcy?
So you can, if you're going to do it yourself, you can go to the court clerk or their website, and they may have the forms online so that you can print out and start doing it that way. If you want to hire a lawyer, I would start by looking. You can call your local bar association because they usually have a recommendation, or you can look on avvo.com for a lawyer. Do you guys have lawyers that you recommend for this stuff? No. So AVO, or your local bar association, but you have to get those forms. So you could see if the clerk will help you. A lot of times they aren't so helpful, but maybe they could just guide you as to where on the court website you can get those. You can also, if you do qualify for legal aid, you may be able to qualify for that as well.
Okay, great. We do have a partner that helps people find bankruptcy attorneys throughout the U.S. I'll go ahead and put their link in here. It's a friend of ours. He was actually on the show a couple weeks ago. You can check it out, tryascend.com. They can find you a bankruptcy attorney in South Carolina. Alrighty. Question from Josh. What's the difference between Chapter 703 versus 704?
I don't know, Chapter 703 and 704 is.
I'm not sure about that either. Is the bankruptcy code divided into subchapters?
It would be Chapter 7 or Chapter 13. There's Chapter 5 for business.
Yeah, there's also something, isn't there, like a Chapter 17 or something?
Yeah, there's one for farmers, but I don't know because that's what he's talking about.
Right. Okay. Well, that's interesting. Yep, we're not sure about that one.
I'm not sure about that. I never heard that one.
Yep, we're not sure if any Chapter 703 bankruptcy. All right. I am in North Carolina. This is from Des Taco. And qualify for Resolve to do my bankruptcy myself. Can I have a lawyer just do the student loan part since this is a separate case? So I guess he's looking to do bankruptcy himself. Can a lawyer do just the student loan part?
Yeah, so you may be able to find one who is willing to do adversary proceedings or litigation for you, who would be willing to do that. I don't know of anyone in your state, but you may be able to call around to see if somebody would do that part specifically.
Is that a common thing to divide bankruptcy by assets?
Sometimes. So sometimes, well, with litigation, so not all bankruptcy attorneys do adversary lawsuits and litigate. So some of them are specifically there if a creditor wants to, try to tell a consumer that they can't discharge their debt. So sometimes other firms specifically focus on litigation, bankruptcy litigation.
Right. Okay. Great. Julian, so if you have no assets or money, do you think it's okay to self-file?
To do what?
Self-file.
Self-file? I mean, I don't know your case, but it sounds like you may be able to. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to. I mean, yeah, if you have nothing, I guess.
Right. It's not much risk if you have nothing.
Yes, there's not much risk if you have nothing, so.
Right. Indeed. Indeed, Julian. Hopefully you get something at some point in time, as well. Hoping for you. All right. Ruthie, trying to download forms on the phone from our site. Help. All right, Ruthie, looks like that's kind of like a support question. You can email us at support@solosuit.com if you have a question. And it should be pretty straightforward. Usually just click on the link and then download it, and maybe it'll open up like a new tab on your phone's web browser. All right. Let's see, what's the next one here? Can a single person LLC with an EIN discharge business debts that they may have personally guaranteed? Are single member LLCs even considered separate entities?
So typically in a Chapter 7 personal bankruptcy, they will look at the business to see if there's assets. Did he say that there were no assets in the business?
Doesn't sound like he mentioned the assets. Just saying.
No.
He's wondering if the.
So you may be able to file Chapter 7, but if there's assets or the business is generating a substantial amount of income, you won't qualify for Chapter 7 at that time.
And you're bringing up Chapter 7 because that's what's needed to discharge the debts.
Correct. So you may be able to do a Chapter 13.
Right.
Based off of paying things back. The only problem with Chapter 13 for some people who have businesses is that you can't take out a lot of times new debt while you're in that Chapter 13, and you need permission from the court. So it's hard to run a business when you need permission from the court to take out new debt.
Right. Okay. All right, maybe we have time for one last question. If I file, this is from John, if I filed Chapter 7 years ago and Chase sold my loan to SPS Servicing, should I say lien? Can they foreclose on me? Yes, I guess he's saying maybe can they get a lien or foreclose on me?
If they were included in the bankruptcy at that time, I would assume if they were not secure, then they should have been discharged. If it's after the bankruptcy filing, then they can get a lien and sue. I don't know. You may want to pull a copy of your bankruptcy paperwork or ask the attorney who filed it at that time for you to see if it was included in the bankruptcy.
Right. Okay. That sounds great. Well, we are half past the hour. Karra, thanks so much for coming on
Thank
to
you.
the show. Everybody, thanks for showing up. Always glad to be of service to you all. Again, SoloSuit is here to help you out. We want to help you win and settle your debt lawsuits. If you want to file for bankruptcy, in New Jersey, you're welcome to go over and talk with Karra. And we're here to help you out.